Venezuela is a developing situation, but ramifications and repercussions of of America's decisions will be felt far and wide. I'm being joined by the person who presented his testimony at the United Nations Security Council discussing U.S. actions in Venezuela, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, renowned American economist and political analyst. Thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Professor Sachs, you spoke at the UNSC on U.S. actions in Venezuela. You spelled out America's plans of regime change through presidents, not just Trump. You have globally exposed the regime change playbook of the U.S. How has this action of Trump changed the rules-based order?
Well, there is no rules-based order. That is a fairy tale of the United States. Anybody who believed that in the last 25 years wasn't paying attention. The United States is governed by military security apparatus, the CIA, the Pentagon, other security agencies largely drive American foreign policy. And one of the pillars of American foreign policy is regime change, either through wars or through so-called color revolutions or through assassinations and coups. There are many ways to change a regime. In the case of Venezuela, the United States has been trying to change this regime, which it doesn't like, because it's a left-wing regime, because it deprives American oil companies of what they want. And for that reason, the United States has been trying to change this regime or this government for more than 20 years. It has used many different attempts. An outright coup attempt in 2002, stoking protests in 2014, draconian economic sanctions in Trump's first term. And finally, Trump said, okay, we're just going to overthrow this government by military means. But it's not happening the way the United States wants. They kidnapped the president, but they did not change the regime. And most American regime change operations actually fail. They certainly fail to achieve the political outcomes that the United States seeks, but they often fail to change the government. And it remains to be seen what's going to happen in Venezuela. In the meantime, it's important to note that President Trump is basically out of control right now. He's making demands and threats to countries all over the world, to Iran, to Nigeria, to Denmark, with its Greenland territory, to Colombia, to Mexico. So this is a fast developing situation,
right.
And not a happy one.
Right. We will talk about the Greenland question, but before that, do you buy the premise that the action was carried out to take out a drug lord, or does it have to do with oil, power, supremacy? Many have also said that Maduro provoked him with the televised dancing and mockery of Trump. What do you think are the primary reasons or provocations over here? And we've seen visuals over here. Did you anticipate, and I've been watching your interviews, your conversations, you must have anticipated all this, the movement, the action, but picking up a president from Venezuela and bringing him to American soil, did you anticipate that?
Well, I anticipated some kind of violent action by the United States. They do kidnap presidents. President Aristide of Haiti was kidnapped by the CIA about 20 years ago. He was marched to a plane with an unmarked tail, and he was flown 23 hours to the Central African Republic, where he was dumped. In this case, they kidnapped the president of Venezuela and brought him to New York City, my home, in fact. What will happen next remains to be seen. If we still have the rule of law in the United States, a judge should not look kindly on the U.S. government kidnapping the president of another country and bringing him forcibly to the United States. So we'll see what the judiciary actually does, whether there is an independent judiciary still in the United States. This is a question. But it was clear that the United States was going to take some kind of violent regime change operation. And I just would like to share an interesting anecdote as part of this. In Trump's first term, In September 2017, in his first year of office, on the margins of the UN General Assembly in September of 2017, Trump had dinner with a number of Latin American presidents, and he said, even then, so we're talking basically about 8 years ago, he said, why don't I just invade Venezuela? So my point is that this is something that has been on the minds of the U.S. Security state for a long time. In that dinner 8 years ago, the Latin American leaders talked him down, said, Mr. President, that's not a very good idea. It could create a lot of instability. It might not be helpful for you and for the United States. Well, this time he didn't seek advice or listen to advice. He just took his foot off of the brake on our military machine, and they went after it. But we're in very early days.
Jeff, what's the intent here? Drug trafficking, doing away with drug traffickers, or is it oil and supremacy?
It is two things. One, any left-wing government is a target of the United States. So this is decades and decades of regime change operations in the Western Hemisphere when there is a left-wing government. So this is part of it. And this is a left-wing government. But the second target is oil, obviously. Venezuela has vast oil reserves. In fact, on the official proved reserves data of the U.S. Geologic Survey and other lists, Venezuela's proved reserves are the largest in the world, even larger than Saudi Arabia's. Of course, they're not as economical. They're heavy oil, but they're nearby the United States. We have the refineries in the southeast of the U.S. Trump, he's a maniac. He looks for oil. He says, well, that's ours. It's like a child, frankly, but it is part of a deep state which has wanted to overthrow this government for a very long time.
Has he pleased the deep state? Because, you know, we hear of a lot of problems between the deep state and Trump. Has he been able to please the deep state here?
Well, the deep state runs the United States foreign policy, not presidents. The presidents come and go, but the deep state remains the deep state. And that's why you have in every administration, think about Bush Jr. in the first years of this century, the invasions of Iraq. Then Obama, who seemed to be a very different person, but he launched the CIA operation to overthrow the Syrian government. He led the NATO operation to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. He oversaw the U.S. operation to overthrow the president of Ukraine in February 2014. So he didn't change very much. Then came Trump. Trump used various means in Venezuela to try to crush the economy. By the way, the comprehensive sanctions that Trump put on were so excruciating that oil production in Venezuela, which is their overwhelming export, fell by 75% between 2016 and 2020, and the economy completely collapsed. But Maduro held power. Then came Biden. He had his own deep state operations, especially in Ukraine and in Gaza, together with Israel. Now Trump is in. He's got his operations. He's making threats all over the place. But my point is, look more deeply at U.S. foreign policy. While Trump is an aberration in certain ways, and if you'll pardon me, in the vulgarity of it, in the explicitness of it, in the open threats, this is how American foreign policy has worked for a very long time. It should not work this way. This is very dangerous. It's against international law. It is not a success story of the United States. It has cost us trillions of dollars. It has cost millions of lives. It does not produce the results that the U.S. deep state wants, but it is their modus operandi.
Right. What is more egregious to you, Trump's actions or muted response of the international community?
Well, the response of the international community is interesting. most countries don't really want to raise their heads because they don't want to be next. If in Europe, these are basically vassal states, almost occupied countries, I have to tell you, because the U.S. military bases are all over Europe. Europe views the United States as its protector against Russia. This is a little ironic because the United States is actually the biggest threat to Europe right now, not Russia. Trump is talking openly about basically invading or taking over Greenland, which is a territory of Denmark. And in fact, European leaders made a statement today, extraordinary, saying that Greenland belongs to Denmark and don't touch it. Can you imagine Europe having to tell the United States, don't invade us? But this is what it's really come to. So the reactions, a few leaders have been very forthright. China, very, very straightforward. This is against international law. It is a flagrant violation of international law. The Russian Federation, the same way. Two big superpowers speaking quite plainly. The Mexican government has spoken clearly that this is a violation. But Mexico, poor Mexico, on the border of the United States and being threatened directly by Donald Trump. Brazil, another major country, a partner of India in the BRICS. President Lula was very, very clear that this is a gross violation of international law and a threat to the peace and a threat to Latin America. So
Right.
you see the reactions of countries that can afford to make those reactions, and then you see a lot of the world leaders just trying to keep their head down so they don't get Donald Trump's animus right now.
Right, that's absolutely right. But President Trump also said that that America is going to control Venezuela till the time there is a smooth transition of power. Could this, Professor Sachs, be Trump's Vietnam or Afghanistan moment?
I very much doubt that the United States is going to control anything in this. How can they? This is a big country. They don't want to be a slave of the United States. They don't want to be a vassal of the United States. There are many people who want good relations with the United States. In fact, many people who would be thrilled for the U.S. to take over. A lot of the upper class and the lot of people who have suffered from the economic sanctions, actually, of the United States and from other causes of the economic collapse in Venezuela, would welcome the U.S. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of opposition to the United States running this country, and I see no prospect for that actually happening. Usually, when the United States makes a regime change like this, the result is instability on a prolonged basis.
That's right.
Often quite deep instability, even civil war in some cases, like in Libya, a regime change operation followed by a civil war. This could happen in Venezuela. Often it's coups or assassinations or ongoing economic crisis, but very rarely do you kidnap a president, say we're going to run the country, and that it works out according to this somewhat fantastical idea of Mr. Trump.
You've already warned that Greenland could be next, but I have to ask you this. What next? Panama, Colombia, Mexico, Greenland. Katie Miller, Stephen Miller's wife, had put out a post with the American flag over the Greenland map saying soon. And Trump reiterated the same thing. So is Greenland next?
My fear is that Iran is next. Keep an eye on Iran. The reason is that Israel is obsessed with Iran, wants to overthrow the Iranian government, and the United States, for reasons that are not 100% clear, I have to say, is basically beholden to Israel. The United States fights wars that Israel tells the United States to fight. It's very, very dark, actually. And so when Netanyahu came to Mar-a-Lago last week, just around New Year's, they made a joint statement basically saying, Iran, you're next, or you could be next. And Trump has said that with protests in Iran, if the government cracks down on the protests, we are basically locked and loaded. We're ready to fight. Well, this is clearly a typical deep state provocation. In other words, we're lining up the arguments, the human rights argument. We're going to go in and invade Iran to protect the people of Iran. This is a standard playbook. And so this is where I would expect the possibility of a real global explosion. And I would give a warning. That one will be hotter than Venezuela if it happens. It would be potentially disastrous because while Venezuela is in the American geographic neighborhood and China and Russia don't want to take on the United States in the Western Hemisphere, Iran is in the middle of a lot of major powers, and Iran is itself with hypersonic missiles and a capacity to do a lot of harm and a lot of damage, and Israel is a nuclear-armed country. All in all, it's a recipe for potential disaster, and sound heads should be saying to the United States right now, stop it. This is not a joke. This is not a game. This is not appealing to your base. This is not social media. This is not some play. This is reality, and stop it before things get out of control.
Right.
Trump has threatened Iran, Mexico, Colombia, obviously Venezuela, Denmark, Nigeria in the last couple of weeks. A president of the United States making dire threats against half a dozen other countries. He's also saying that the government of Cuba is about to fall. All of this is just like lighting the fuse all over the place, and things could get really, really dangerous. And so world leaders need to wake up. You know, it's interesting with the Europeans in panic over the statements about Greenland. They say, don't touch us, but they're so scared, so hypocritical, by the way, that they don't complain about Venezuela, but they say, don't come after us.
Absolutely.
Well, European leaders need to stand up and be real human beings, actually, not just vassals. And they have to say it's not right in Greenland, but it's also not right in Venezuela. It's not right in Iran. They have to stop playing the subservient vassals of the United States.
Or Gaza, for that matter. You know, they woke up and voiced concerns for Ukraine, but when it came to Gaza and now Venezuela, they're really not speaking the way they spoke earlier and the way they were pushing America to fight the battle. But coming back to the reports that we saw earlier about Khamenei moving out of Iran and going to Russia, is Putin becoming the global savior here? Whistleblowers from America, Assad from Syria, and now maybe Iranian leadership.
I haven't actually seen the news because I've been traveling, so I don't know any details of what's happening specifically in Iran in the last 48 hours or in the most recent days. But I believe that we already have heard the threats very clearly. To my mind, Israel is even more of a rogue state than the United States. And Israel absolutely has its eye on some kind of strike to try to overthrow the government of Iran. And if history is any guide, we're in for something that could be extremely, extremely dangerous.
Monroe Doctrine now, by some, has been rechristened Donroe Doctrine. And we're looking at a Western Hemisphere narrative that has been put out by the Trump administration. Isn't that imperialistic and expansionist in nature at a time when maybe it's not just the international laws, but Trump has also violated some of the domestic war laws by not informing the Armed Services Committee, the Congress, not being kept in the loop, sir?
Look, we don't have a constitutional order right now. All those tariffs that were put on India, for example, were the whim of the President of the United States declaring this emergency or that emergency by executive decree. Congress has the power of war, not the President, but doesn't matter. And when a congressman complained that this is unconstitutional, Trump mocked him. Constitution? What are you whining about? He said. So we have a political crisis in the United States. It's not called that. It's not recognized like that. Congressmen still go to their office or they go to the floor of the House or the Senate, but they don't play a role. This is an executive branch that's on its own right now. And this is also very sad and very dangerous. Thank you so much for letting me be with you. I am going to have to run at this point.
All right. Before you go, just one last question, and that has to do with China. I have to ask you this before I let you go.
Sure.
The Western Hemisphere argument by the United States of America, does that now give room for China to play out its plans for a takeover of Taiwan at a time when they're saying this is our region? China can say, okay, we've done nothing there, then you do nothing here.
Well, I hope that China and India, indeed the BRICS countries, will say this is not the way we want the world to operate. We want the world to operate according to the UN Charter, to international law. I believe that what has happened is actually an important opportunity for the BRICS, which this year has the Indian presidency, to say no. We represent the bulk of humanity. In fact, the emerging and developing economies are 85% of the world population. We don't want to go down the road of rogue states. And so I hope that the BRICS actually make a real point right now. This is not how we behave. This is not how we're going to behave. We will defend the UN Charter.
On that note, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global.
Really a pleasure. Thank you.